The studio lights at Fox News were positioned exactly as Sarah Huckabee Sanders preferred them, softer than the standard cable news setup, angled to smooth the lines that had appeared during her years as White House press secretary and then governor of Arkansas. She settled into the guest chair across from the host with the practiced ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times, adjusting her blazer with a small, satisfied smile. The segment producer had briefed her 30 minutes earlier. A rising Democratic congresswoman from Texas would be joining remotely. Young, inexperienced, first-term, African-American woman from Dallas who had made some noise about Arkansas education policy in a committee hearing last week. Sanders had laughed when she heard the setup. This was going to be easy. The host opened with the framing question, asking Sanders to respond to recent criticism of her education reforms in Arkansas. Sanders leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting into what her staff called her compassionate authority mode. She spoke directly to camera, her voice warm but firm, the tone of a patient teacher addressing a confused student. She said that it was disappointing to see members of Congress who had never run anything, never managed a state budget, never been accountable to actual voters for actual results, criticizing governors who were doing the hard work of reform. She said that some people in Washington seemed to think that good intentions were the same thing as good policy. She paused for effect, then delivered the line her team had workshopped that morning. She said that when you have never been responsible for educating even one child, it is remarkably easy to criticize those of us who are responsible for educating hundreds of thousands. Her smile widened just slightly. She said that perhaps the congresswoman from Dallas should focus on learning how Congress works before she starts telling governors how states work. The insult landed exactly as intended, dismissive, condescending, wrapped in the language of experience and responsibility. The kind of public diminishment that would play perfectly in her base and make the evening news. Sanders sat back in her chair, visibly pleased with herself, her hands folded comfortably in her lap. The host nodded approvingly and turned to introduce the remote feed. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett appeared on the monitor, seated in what appeared to be her congressional office, the Texas and American flags visible behind her left shoulder. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a black shell, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had not spent any time thinking about camera angles or lighting. She looked directly into her camera with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. The host invited Crockett to respond to the governor's comments. There was a brief pause, perhaps 2 seconds, during which Sanders maintained her smile. Then Crockett spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, the kind of tone a surgeon might use when explaining a diagnosis. She said that she appreciated the governor taking time out of her schedule to join this conversation, and she wanted to address the question of experience directly because the governor had raised an important point. She said that the governor was absolutely right that experience matters in public service. She paused, and something in the way she paused made the Fox News control room suddenly attentive. She said that was precisely why she had brought some materials with her today. Crockett reached off camera and lifted a dark blue binder into frame. It was thick, at least 3 inches, with visible tabbed sections in different colors. She placed it on the desk in front of her with a soft thud that the microphone picked up clearly. She said that this binder contained the education records for Arkansas under Governor Sanders' administration, compiled from public sources, Department of Education data, and Freedom of Information requests that her office had filed over the past 6 weeks. She said that since the governor had mentioned experience and results, she thought it might be useful to review what those results actually were. Her hand rested on top of the binder, motionless. She said that she hoped the governor had a few minutes because there was quite a bit to cover. Something shifted in Sanders's face. Not panic, not yet, but a flicker of uncertainty that passed across her eyes before her media training reasserted control. Her smile remained fixed, but had lost its warmth. She said that she was happy to discuss her record any time, and she was proud of what Arkansas had accomplished. Her voice had gone slightly higher, just a fraction, the way voices do when confidence begins to crack at the edges. Crockett nodded slowly, as if this was exactly the response she had expected. She opened the binder to the first tabbed section, the paper crackling slightly in the studio silence. She said that she wanted to start with something simple, something the governor had said many times in public statements and campaign materials. She said that Governor Sanders had repeatedly claimed that Arkansas education spending had increased under her administration and that she had made education her top budget priority. Crockett looked down at the page, then back up at the camera. She said that according to the Arkansas Department of Education's own published budget documents from fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024, per-pupil spending in Arkansas had actually decreased by 3.2% when adjusted for inflation. She said that the governor's budget had proposed a 2.7% increase in nominal dollars, but inflation during that same period was 6.1%, which meant that in real purchasing power, every school district in Arkansas had less money per student than they had the year before. She said that this was not analysis or interpretation. This was arithmetic. She said the documents were all publicly available on the state's own website, and she would be happy to provide the exact URLs if the governor wanted to verify the numbers herself. Sanders started to respond, her hand lifting slightly as if to dismiss the point, but Crockett continued in the same quiet, relentless tone. She said that she understood how these things could be confusing when you were looking at nominal versus real dollars, and perhaps the governor's staff had not adequately explained the difference. She said that she wanted to be very clear about what this meant in practice. She turned to the second tab in her binder. She said that reduced per-pupil funding meant that districts had to make choices, and she wanted to talk about what some of those choices had been. She said that in the Fort Smith School District, 15 teaching positions had been eliminated at the end of the last school year. In Jonesboro, the district had cut funding for after-school tutoring programs entirely. In Pine Bluff, which served a majority African-American student population, the district had eliminated all arts and music instruction for elementary students because those were considered non-essential under the governor's accountability metrics. She paused and looked directly into the camera with an expression that could have been mistaken for sympathy if not for the absolute stillness of her eyes. She said that perhaps the governor could explain how cutting music and arts education for low-income black children in Pine Bluff represented making education a top priority. She said that she was genuinely curious about the thinking behind that decision. The silence that followed was not long, perhaps 5 seconds, but it was absolute. The Fox News host glanced at Sanders, clearly expecting her to jump in with a defense, but Sanders was staring at the monitor with an expression that had gone completely blank. Her mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Finally, she said that those were local district decisions, not state decisions, and that districts had flexibility in how they allocated their budgets. Crockett's expression did not change. She said that the governor was technically correct that districts made allocation decisions, but she wondered if the governor remembered her own testimony to the Arkansas legislature in February of last year. She turned to another tabbed section, this one marked with a yellow flag. She said that in that testimony, which was transcribed and available in the legislative record, Governor Sanders had explicitly stated that her budget model gave districts the flexibility to prioritize what mattered most, and that she trusted local leaders to make the right choices with the resources provided. She looked up from the page. She said that so the governor had designed a funding model that forced districts to cut programs, and then when those cuts happened exactly as predicted, the governor now claimed those were local decisions outside her control. She said that this seemed like a remarkably convenient interpretation of accountability. Sanders's face had gone from pale to slightly flushed, a pink tint appearing at her cheekbones that the studio lights made more visible. She said that Crockett was twisting her words and taking things out of context. Her voice had an edge now, sharper than the warm gubernatorial tone from the opening. She said that Arkansas students were performing better than ever on state assessments, and that was what mattered. Crockett nodded again with that same infuriating patience. She said that the governor had raised an excellent point about assessment scores, and she was glad they were moving to that topic because she had quite a bit of information on that as well. She turned to a new section, this one thicker than the previous ones, marked with a red tab. She said that Governor Sanders was referring to the Arkansas state assessment results from spring 2024, which had indeed shown a modest improvement in proficiency rates. She said that what the governor had not mentioned in any of her public statements about those scores was that the assessment itself had changed. She said that in 2023, Arkansas had used the ACT Aspire assessment, which was a nationally normed test that allowed for state-to-state comparisons. She said that in 2024, Governor Sanders' administration had switched to a new state-designed assessment called the Arkansas Readiness Assessment, which was not nationally normed and used different proficiency cut scores. She said that comparing scores between two different tests with different difficulty levels and different scoring standards was meaningless. She said it was like claiming you had gotten taller by switching from inches to centimeters. She said that she understood why the governor might want to avoid comparisons to other states, because when you looked at nationally normed assessments where Arkansas could be compared to other states, the picture was quite different. She said that on the most recent NAEP assessment, which was the National Assessment of Educational Progress administered by the federal government to a representative sample of students in every state, Arkansas fourth graders ranked 42nd in reading and 44th in math. She said that Arkansas 8th graders ranked 43rd in reading and 45th in math. She said that these rankings had not improved under Governor Sanders' administration. In fact, Arkansas had dropped 2 positions in 4th grade math and 1 position in 8th grade reading compared to the previous assessment cycle. She said that these were not her numbers or partisan talking points. These were federal assessment results available on the NAEP website that anyone could verify. The silence that followed was longer this time. 10 seconds. 15. 20. The Fox News host shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the dead air, but before he could interject, Sanders spoke. Her voice had lost all of its earlier warmth. She said that NAEP was a limited sample and did not reflect the full picture of student achievement. She said that her reforms were about more than test scores. They were about parental rights and transparency, and making sure that schools were accountable to families, not to bureaucrats. Crockett's expression remained unchanged, but something in her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. She sat slightly straighter. She said that the governor had just mentioned parental rights and transparency, and she wanted to explore that claim in some detail because it raised important questions about what those words actually meant in practice. She turned to a new section of her binder, this one marked with a green tab. She said that one of Governor Sanders' signature education initiatives had been the Arkansas Learns Act, which the governor had promoted as the most comprehensive education reform in state history. She said that one provision of that act required schools to provide parents with detailed curriculum information and gave parents the right to opt their children out of certain instructional content. She said that this sounded reasonable in principle, but she wanted to talk about how it had been implemented. She said that her office had obtained, through public records requests, the curriculum challenge forms that had been filed in Arkansas school districts in the first year after the law went into effect. She said that there had been over 400 formal challenges to instructional materials, library books, and classroom content. She said that she wanted to read a few examples of what had been challenged and in some cases removed from Arkansas schools under the governor's parental rights framework. She said that in the Bentonville School District, a parent had successfully challenged the inclusion of a children's book about Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old girl who integrated an all-white elementary school in New Orleans. The book had been removed from the elementary school library. In Fayetteville, a biography of Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani girl who survived being shot by the Taliban for advocating for girls' education, had been challenged and removed from a middle school reading list. In Little Rock, a high school history teacher had been formally reprimanded for showing students a PBS documentary about the Little Rock Nine because a parent complained that it made white people look bad. She looked directly into the camera with an expression that had gone completely still. She said that she wanted the governor to understand what she was saying very clearly. Under the governor's parental rights framework, Arkansas students were being prevented from learning about Ruby Bridges, Malala Yousafzai, and the Little Rock Nine. She said that Arkansas children were being taught a version of history in which the children who integrated their own state schools had been erased. She said that she would like the governor to explain how this represented educational excellence or transparency or any value other than allowing the most regressive voices in any community to determine what every child could learn. Sanders' hands had moved from her lap to grip the armrests of her chair. Her knuckles were visible white even through the studio lights. She said that Crockett was cherry-picking extreme examples and that the vast majority of parents were making reasonable decisions about their children's education. She said that she trusted Arkansas parents more than she trusted federal bureaucrats or liberal activists. Crockett said that she appreciated the governor's trust in parents, but she wanted to clarify something about who exactly was making these decisions. She said that in the Bentonville case she had just mentioned, the parent who challenged the Ruby Bridges book was not a Bentonville parent. She was a resident of Missouri who was affiliated with a national conservative organization called Moms for Liberty, and she had filed identical challenges in 7 states under a coordinated campaign. She said that this was a pattern across Arkansas. She said that her office had analyzed the curriculum challenges and found that 62% of them had been filed by individuals who were not parents of students in the affected schools, and 38% had been filed by people using template language provided by out-of-state activist organizations. She said that so when the governor talked about trusting Arkansas parents, what she actually meant was empowering a small number of political activists, many of them not even Arkansas residents, to remove books and instructional materials from schools attended by thousands of Arkansas children whose parents had no say in the matter. She said that this was not parental rights. This was minority veto power over public education. She turned to another section of the binder, and the motion had a quality of inevitability to it, as if every page turn revealed another layer of something that could not be defended. She said that she wanted to address one more aspect of the governor's record before they ran out of time, because it went directly to the question the governor had raised at the beginning of this segment about experience and accountability. She said that Governor Sanders had repeatedly claimed that her education reforms were saving Arkansas taxpayers money by eliminating waste and inefficiency. She said that her office had obtained the contracts for outside consultants hired by the Arkansas Department of Education since Governor Sanders took office. She said that in the previous administration, the department had spent approximately $2.1 million annually on outside consultants. She said that under Governor Sanders, that figure had increased to $7.4 million. She said that she wanted to be specific about where that money had gone. She said that the state had paid a consulting firm called Education First, which was based in Massachusetts, $1.8 million to redesign the state assessment system. She said that the contract had been awarded without competitive bidding. She said that Education First's CEO was a former advisor to Governor Sanders during her time as White House press secretary. She said that the state had paid another firm, this one based in Texas, $1.2 million to develop training materials for the new curriculum transparency requirements. She said the contract had also been awarded without competitive bidding, and the firm's principal had donated $47,000 to Governor Sanders' gubernatorial campaign. She said that in total over $4 million in consultant contracts had gone to firms with direct political or personal connections to the governor, none of them through competitive bidding processes, all of them justified as necessary for education reform. She looked up from the binder with an expression that was no longer gentle or patient. It was something colder. She said that so when the governor talked about eliminating waste, what she actually meant was redirecting millions of taxpayer dollars to political allies and former staffers while cutting music programs for low-income children. She said that when the governor talked about accountability, she meant holding teachers and districts accountable for test scores on assessments that could not be compared to any national standard, while exempting herself from accountability for spending decisions that benefited her donors. She said that she wanted to ask the governor a very simple question, one that should have a very simple answer. She said that given everything they had just discussed, the funding cuts, the assessment manipulation, the censorship of civil rights history, and the no-bid contracts to political allies, could the governor name a single metric by which Arkansas students were better off today than they were before she took office? She said that she was not asking for a talking point or a slogan. She was asking for a specific, verifiable outcome that had improved for Arkansas children as a direct result of the governor's policies. She said that just one example would be sufficient. She leaned back slightly and waited. The silence that followed was total. Sanders stared at the monitor, her mouth slightly open, her hands still gripping the armrests. Her face had gone through pink to a deeper red, not the flush of anger but something closer to the color of humiliation. The Fox News host glanced at her, then at the control room, clearly hoping for guidance on how to salvage the segment. 23 seconds passed. Someone in the control room could be heard whispering something off microphone. A pen dropped in the studio, the sound sharp and intrusive in the silence. Sanders' lips moved as if she were trying to form words, but nothing came out. Finally, she said that this was clearly a partisan ambush, and she had not come on the show to be lectured by someone who had never governed anything. Crockett said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been at any point in the segment. She said that the governor was right, that she had never been a governor. She said that she had been a civil rights attorney for 9 years before coming to Congress. She said that in that capacity, she had represented families whose children had been denied equal access to education, parents who had been shut out of decision-making processes, teachers who had been retaliated against for speaking up about funding cuts and curriculum censorship. She said that she had spent nearly a decade in courtrooms arguing that children deserved better than what they were getting, and that accountability meant something more than political spin. She said that when she was elected to Congress, she made a decision that she would not criticize any policy or any official without first doing the homework. She said that meant reading the budgets, obtaining the contracts, analyzing the assessment data, reviewing the implementation records, and talking to the people who were actually affected. She said that she had spent 6 weeks preparing for this conversation because she believed that if she was going to question someone's record, she owed it to them and to the public to know exactly what she was talking about. She said that she had not come here to ambush anyone. She had come here with documents, data, and a genuine question about whether Arkansas children were better off. She said that the governor still had not answered that question. She said that perhaps the reason the governor could not answer was because the answer was uncomfortable. She said that when you cut funding, manipulate assessments to hide poor performance, allow political activists to censor civil rights history, and redirect taxpayer money to political allies, you are not reforming education. You are dismantling it while claiming credit for the wreckage. She said that children in Pine Bluff who would never have music class, students in Little Rock who would never learn about the Little Rock Nine, and families across Arkansas who were watching their schools decline while consultants got rich did not care about the governor's talking points. They cared about results. She said that the data showed there were no results worth defending. Sanders had gone completely still, her face frozen in an expression that was no longer even attempting authority or control. She looked like someone who had just realized they were in a room with no exits. The host, sensing disaster, tried to redirect by asking Sanders about her plans for the next legislative session, but Sanders was not listening. She was staring at the monitor where Crockett sat with her binder still open, her expression neutral, waiting. Sanders said something about needing to get to another commitment. Her voice was thin, almost inaudible. She reached up and removed her microphone, the motion jerky and graceless, and stood before the host could object. She walked off camera, her heels clicking against the studio floor, the sound fading as she moved toward the exit. The host stared after her, momentarily speechless himself. Crockett remained on the monitor, her expression unchanged. The host, now alone, turned to her and asked if she had anything to add. Crockett said that she thought the governor's exit had said everything that needed to be said. She said that public officials were accountable to the public, and accountability required the willingness to answer hard questions with actual answers, rather than slogans. She said that when officials could not or would not do that, their silence told you everything you needed to know about the quality of their work. She thanked the host for his time, and the feed cut to commercial. In the days that followed, the segment would be clipped, shared, and viewed millions of times across every social media platform. The 23 seconds of silence would become its own viral moment, played and replayed with mounting disbelief that a sitting governor had been so thoroughly unprepared. Political analysts would discuss it as a case study in what happens when officials mistake media training for competence and assume that credentials are a defense against documentation. But in the immediate aftermath, in the Fox News studio that still smelled faintly of Sanders' perfume, the production staff stood in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. One thing was certain. Sarah Huckabee Sanders had opened the segment by questioning Jasmine Crockett's qualifications and experience. She had suggested that a first-term congresswoman from Dallas had no business criticizing someone who had governed. She had smiled with the confidence of someone who believed her resume made her immune to accountability. But resumes do not answer for funding cuts, credentials do not explain away censored history books, and titles do not protect you when someone has done the homework and brought the receipts. Sanders had learned that lesson in the most public way possible. She had questioned Crockett's qualifications at the start of the hearing. But in the end, it was not Crockett who lacked the preparation, the competence, or the answers. It was the governor who had fled rather than face the evidence. And the silence she left behind said everything her words could not.